There we go. Had my microphone turned off for a second. Hello, how's everybody doing today? If you could do me a favor, please, and just let me know, regardless if you're watching me on Zoom or YouTube, if you can hear me and where you're listening from, that would be great. I know there are a bunch of questions already filling up. I can see them, and I have questions already from our Zoom audience who gets priority. By the way, if you want to have priority and you want to ask me anything that you want, join my free group. Membership is free in the group for startup CEOs. It's called Zero to Pitch. You can find information about the group on my YouTube channel. If you're watching me on YouTube right now, you can find information about the group right there, and you can click on over, answer a couple of questions, and you will get admitted if you are a startup CEO. So anyways, we got lots of questions. It looks like I'm going to start the Zoom audience, as I said, because they are already members. They get priority, and then I will hop on over and answer the YouTube questions, and we'll go from there. So thanks a lot, and let's get started with our questions. Let me go find them. Okay. Okay, the first question that we have is, what are the differences between the approach and deck used for pitches to potential investors versus company executives regarding A, a potential merger, and B, an acquisition? Oh, so the potential investors. Okay, so for investors, um, follow the format in my startup pitch deck template. If you follow that format, you're going to be perfect. And really, if we're trying to do mergers and acquisitions, I think this would be pretty similar. Quite honestly, I don't think there'll be much of a difference between the two because we have to tell the same story about what's unique about us, what's the pain we're trying to solve, how do we solve it, all of those types of things. So the deck, at least for the first meeting, now subsequent meetings and diligence meetings that we have, we're going to have to do a lot more than this. And you'll get led pretty much, and there'll be a data room in both cases, and you'll be able to answer questions that way. But for the first meeting, the decks are going to be pretty darn similar, to be honest. So I don't think there's going to be much of a difference there between the two. And for M&A, possible acquisition, possible, all these things are the same. So I think the deck is going to be pretty darn similar between the two. I don't think there's going to be really any differences, except for when you get to the follow-on meetings, and there, let the investor or the acquirer lead you to the approach that you need to take. In other words, they're going to set up a set of questions that you need to answer, and you just need to be led. That's it. Okay, so let's go to the next question on our list. Okay, as a startup founder, would you find value in a free newsletter that provides practical guidance on navigating legal issues, like finding and working with lawyers, reducing legal expenses, and avoiding common legal pitfalls? Let me start there. Yeah, I think there would be utility and value in this because I think lawyers are a gray area for most startup CEOs in my experience. So anything that you can do to help people and teach people about this area, I think, especially if you have experience, this is the key thing, if you have experience in the startup world. In other words, you have been involved as an attorney as being a general counsel for startups. You've helped finance startups. You've reviewed term sheets, all those types of things. There's a huge gray area for most startup CEOs, and in fact, I would say most startup CEOs underestimate the importance of attorneys. So that's the first part of your question, and then you go on and give experience about what you've done. You have 25 years of experience as a litigator, bankruptcy attorney. plus 10 years as EVP General Counsel to a Canadian startup, and considering launching a resource focused on legal literacy for founders. And I'd love your thoughts. So, okay, so hopefully that helps you in terms of my thoughts, in terms of what you're trying to do. So yeah, I think there's utility in it, especially if you have experience. Okay, so let's move on to, let's see what our next questions are. Okay. I've had more success with getting investor interest since following your videos. Many thanks. You're quite welcome. I've secured a second meeting with a sizable investment group tomorrow who believe my project to prepare the docs needed to take it to their investors. What sort of questions should I prepare for? Well, this goes back to what I just said. Hopefully they've led you in terms of what questions to expect. It's pretty broad what you're saying. You have a second meeting. Usually after the first meeting, depending upon who you're meeting with, it's either a repeat of the first meeting, in which case you would give the exact same presentation again, or they're going to say, hey, we'd really like you to focus here. Like typically the typical sequence is you'll meet with the partner, you may meet with more partners, and then you're going to go into some sort of diligence, typically technical diligence. In other words, they're going to want to review the technology, and that would mean that they would provide a quote unquote technologist on their end to meet with you, and you would review that with them at that time in terms of the technical questions that they'll go through. And usually they will tell you in advance, here's what we're interested in at some level. If they have concerns, they will tell you that in advance as well, and you'll learn that piece. So I'm sorry, I wish you had given me more to go on here, but it's pretty broad what you're asking. But that's the best answer, at least I can give in this moment. Okay, let's move on to more questions. If you have questions for me, by the way, you can put them in the chat box or the Q&A box if you're watching me on Zoom, or if you're watching me on YouTube, you can put them in the chat box. And if you're interested and excited and you like what you're hearing here on YouTube and you're not already part of my free community, please join my free community, Zero to Pitch. It is absolutely free, and you can become a member for life. All you have to do is just answer a couple questions and away you go. So the first question I have, sadly, I don't think I can answer. How much quantitative data should I collect? It said that, and it's like, well, that's such a broad question, person who's asking me this. My answer would be as much as you can. The more quantitative data you have, the better off you're going to be in terms of whatever it is you're trying to do. But don't get overwhelmed by it, and don't become a slave to the data either. You've got to move. I mean, one of the big things that you can do as in a startup, and the big advantage that you have is speed. So yes, collect data, get as much data as you can for the various things that you're doing, but don't become a slave to it either. Next question we have. What can you suggest to overcome competition anxiety for first-time startup founders? So you're worried, if you're worried, we all have this, you know, what do they call it? This fear of that we're going to get found out, right? That we're, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the term for it, but this imposter syndrome, which I think is what you're describing. We all have it at some level. So the first thing I would tell you is don't worry about it. The second thing I would tell you, I mean, if you're worried about competition, number one, the only person that you can control in this whole process is yourself. So on the one hand, yes, keep track of the competition, understand what the competition is doing. On the other hand, there's only one person you can control, which is yourself. And if you're anxious about what competitors are doing or not doing, focus on yourself. It removes the problem as best you can. That's what I would remember. The third thing I would tell you is competition is good. It is a red flag if you're the only one doing something like what you're doing. There's usually competition of one sort or another. And the reason why I say it's a red flag is because the likelihood that you're the only smart person in the world that's focused on this particular area, if it is a big market, is very low. There are other smart people out there. So it doesn't mean that everybody's going to do the exact same thing as you. On the contrary, you may have a very unique way of approaching the problem, which hopefully you do, and that's how you win. All right, the next question we have. Love from India. Okay, very cool. Could you please give tips for acquiring talent for starting a startup company in a niche as a student entrepreneur? Thank you so much. Well, I think the most obvious one, if you're looking for talent and you're a student, you're going to college, let's say, find other students in your university who are really smart, just like you, to join your cause. The example that pops into my mind, and I'm sure there are many others, but the one that pops into my mind just because a movie was made out of this was Facebook. All of the founders, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, all came from Harvard. They were all Mark Zuckerberg's friends at Harvard. So find other smart people right in your backyard. That's going to be the best chance you have of being able to build out your team, is going to be other smart people at your university. It's going to be very difficult for you on the flip side of this to hire experienced people if you are a young person. It's just kind of like it is. I mean, it's really hard to do because, people usually don't want to work for people who have no experience. If I'm experienced, the odds that I'm going to want to work for you if you're inexperienced are very, very low. So look for people your age in and around your university. Use your network. If you have friends at other universities, contact them. That's the way to go. The next question that we have. Uh-oh. There we go. Hang on. There we go. What are tips and advices? I think you mean advice. You can give to someone who is not used to competing and feels anxiety from time to time. It distracts from building what's important. Okay, I think I answered that already. It's the same thing. Focus on yourself. Focus on the execution. Don't worry about the outside world. Don't get distracted. It's the smartest thing you can do. When you have anxiety about everything else, it makes it really difficult to function. So focus on yourself because you're the only person you can control in this whole thing. That's the best advice I can give you. All right. Next question. By the way, today it looks like we have a very international audience, which I love. We've got people in Europe, India, the US, all over the world listening, which is fantastic. Next question. Hi, Brett. Is revenue required to raise pre-seed funding? Thanks. Well, it depends upon how much your pre-seed funding is. I have videos on this about how much traction you need, so you can watch the video and maybe that'll help you with this question. What I would tell you is, obviously, the more revenue you have, the easier it is to raise money. If we're talking about pre-seed money, and I have no idea what the amount is here, but let's just say it's like $100,000 or a couple $100,000, something like that. The answer is that it may or may not be required. It just depends upon the market that you're in, how much progress you've made on other fronts. That's the broader thing. Like, for example, if you're just starting from scratch and you're trying to raise from angel investors, which is kind of what you're describing here, it might be a little bit more difficult if you don't have some sort of track record to raise money. But if you're trying to raise from friends and family, traction revenue really isn't going to matter. As we start going up the food chain of investors, the more revenue, the more traction we have, the easier it's going to be to raise money. So it may or may not be required depending upon the amount that you're raising. If you have gotten to the point where you've developed your MVP and have made progress on that front in developing your first product, that's going to help you raise money. If you've built a strong team around you, That's going to help you raise money. All of these things, the more you've done, the better off you're going to be. I hope that helps. Next question, are accelerators worth it for technical startups? Depends on the accelerator. It's always buyer beware, right? So if we're talking about Y Combinator, I think they're fantastic. And the problem with Y Combinator is it's not so easy to get in. They don't let everybody in. Just because you want in doesn't mean they're going to let you in. But if you could get into a Y Combinator, beautiful, fantastic, highly recommended. As we start talking about other accelerators, it may not be worth it. Look at the track record of the accelerator before you decide to join them. That's what I would say. Okay, as a reminder, if you want to join my free group for startup CEOs, you can do that. All you have to do, it's called Zero to Pitch. There's a link on the YouTube site for that. And you can happily do that. If you want to go even faster and you're already a member of my Zero to Pitch community, which is free, you can join my paid community, Zero to Pitch Gold. It costs all of $99 a month. And rather than this webinar format, I have daily office hours where we can actually talk to each other and I can help you there. And if you want a year membership, you can do that for $999 for a year membership to it. And you get a 1 hour one-on-one meeting for me, which by the way is a $2,000 value. So do that if you really want to move faster, you really want to go quicker in terms of what you're doing, especially for fundraising. Okay, let's go to our next question. How would you compensate the very first employee when they work for free to develop a product soon on the market? Okay, I think what you're describing isn't really an employee, to be very honest with you, if they're working for you for free. And it sounds like maybe you don't have any funding at this point. It sounds like a co-founder. So because if you're not going to compensate them with cash, then you better give them a really good deal in equity, which is founder stock. And congratulations, I guess, because it sounds like you've got a co-founder. So that person is one of your co-founders. So you'll have to work out an agreement with them that makes sense. And since we're talking about agreements with co-founders, and this usually comes up every time I do one of these Ask Me Anything, so I'll do it here. If we're going to have co-founder agreements, since there was a question about lawyers at the beginning. Number one is you want to make sure these things are set up properly. What does that mean? It means that you want to have the equity vest over time. So for example, let's just say it's you and your co-founder and you have like a 60-40 split between the two of you on the equity. You want to make sure that your equity vests over time. You do not give somebody 40% because what if they walk out tomorrow? It's going to cause huge problems for your company, or they don't work out. So the typical vesting schedule is 4 years with what's called a 1-year cliff, which means no equity vests for a year, then a quarter of it vests, and the rest vests typically monthly for the next 36 months. And you want to have a lawyer set up these agreements so that they're set up properly. That's in an ideal world. That's what I would do. Okay, let's go to the next question on our list. Dear Brett, where did it go? Where did our question go? Lots of questions today, which is very cool. Okay, dear Brett, I'm reaching out on behalf of an extraordinary individual who prefers to remain behind the scenes for now, yet whose vision and wealth are on the brink of reshaping industries on a global basis. Okay, global scale. Oh, yeah, okay, it sounds like garbage. Sorry. This individual, a monarch of vast means, is focused on launching a revolutionary startup. However, due to his position in private royalty, he must operate without being the visible face, blah, blah. Okay, this is a bunch of crap. Sorry. Okay. Now, finally, we get to a question. What would your ultimate strategic approach for leading an empire? Oh, come on. All right. Sorry, person. This isn't. I'm sorry. I'm not answering this. This is just garbage. You're wasting my time and you're wasting the group's time. Okay, let's move on. Where is the link? You should be able to find it. If we're talking about for zero to pitch, there should be a link on the YouTube, my YouTube page. There should be a link for it there. And if not, I will absolutely put it in the notes below this video once we're done. Sorry about that. I'm pretty sure it's there. Maybe it's not. Okay, let's go to the next question. Oh, this person keeps going on. All right, next question. We are creating a data insights company and are looking for guidance. Thanks. That's nice. You're welcome. Is there a question? Okay. All right. Good afternoon. What happens to the shares that haven't been vested in the event of an exit? That's a really good question. So let's say that we have a stock option pool, let's say that is worth 5% of the company. I'm just making up a random number here. So 5%. So 5% stock option pool that is unallocated. Let's put it that way. So you have 5% unallocated. So if you have a 5% stock option pool that is unallocated at the time of an acquisition, essentially, typically what would happen is that equity would be retired. So in other words, we would then increase the equity position by 5% of the other people, in the company. That's typically what would happen. So if you have, in other words, your percentage ownership would increase by 5% across the board. So if I had, let's say, 10% of the company, doesn't mean I'm going to increase to 15, but I got to think about I'm sorry, I got to think about the math on this, but I think essentially we're going to retire that, and it's going to increase the numbers by a percentage. And I'm sorry, I'm blanking on what the percentage would be, because my example would mean essentially that if I had 10, I would go up to 15. That doesn't make any sense, actually, because that would mean I take it all. So that 5% would be allocated across everybody else. That's the way to think about it. So if there are 5 investors, each of which own the same amount, they'd each get 1% more, and so forth and so on. So that would just be, so that 5% would just be allocated that way. So I hope that answers your question. So if you have questions for me, you can put them in the chat box on Zoom or YouTube. It's a great way to do it. If you're interested in joining my free group, if you're watching on Zoom, all you have to do is just click on the link for Zero to Pitch, and it will pop you over there. And that's great. Or you can go to my website, by the way, and there's information there on it. So there's multiple places to find it. Okay, next question. Do you have any tips for composing cold call emails to possible corporate investors in your early stage company so they get opened and get a positive response for an initial meeting? Yes, I've done a video on this, actually, and I've done blog posts on this. So I'll give you the high level overview of this about the way to do it. The first thing, which is the most important thing that you are describing, is the headline, because we've got to get people to the subject line of the email, right? You got to get people to open it. So it has to be something compelling. So typically, when I've done these before, and I've had a pretty reasonable success rate on these, which is about 25 to 30% response rate on doing these, and being able to get meetings about 25 to 30% of the time, which isn't bad, for this type of an effort. I'll make the subject line straight and to the point. So if you have an investment, let's say, a SaaS company focused on medical something or other, I would say subject, SaaS medical investment opportunity, something like that, something straightforward, right to the point. And then in the body of the pitch, the body of the email, you want to get right to it, right? You do not want to write a 5-page monologue or something like that. You want to be short and to the point. You want to make it easy to read, easy to follow, because the investor is going to open, if they open it, they're going to look at it. And if it's a wall of text, they're on to the next thing. If it's too long, they're on to the next thing. So we got to get really quick, really dirty in terms of what it is that we're trying to tell people and how we're going to get their attention and get them excited about what we're doing. So if you follow what I've done, the way that I did it was I introduced myself. I said, hey, I'm the CEO. Here's what I'm doing. Here's the uniqueness of our business, very quickly and to the point. And and then you'd have a quick ask at the end, saying that I'd love to meet with you at your discretion. Don't say something like, I'm trying to think of the way to put this, but do not, say, hey, how about like 15 minutes of your time for coffee, or something like that. That is a massive turnoff to most people. Yes, you want a meeting. They know you want a meeting. But just say something that's a little bit more of a lighter ask, that's more like, hey, I'd love to share our vision with you, if you're interested. Because if they're interested, guess what? They'll get back to you. So that's the way to do it. And watch my video. I do it a lot more coherently in the video, actually. Okay, let's see what our next question is. Okay, Randy asks, is your expertise universal or limited to the American region? No, I'd say it's pretty universal. Randy's from Germany, by the way. Yes, it's pretty universally. I've worked with people in Europe. We work with people in the US, Canada, Mexico, Asia, Africa, the Middle East, you name it. I've worked with people from, I think, in Australia as well. I've worked with people in every single continent of the world, with the exception, I think, of Antarctica. So, but I know people have been to Antarctica, so for whatever that's worth. So anyways, yeah, I think my experience is pretty universal. Okay, next question we have. Hello, we have a deep tech startup for solar cells. More precisely, material called perovskite. We have a decent lab and are already an MVP with 3 additional improvements, but still currently TRL4. I don't know what that means. So tested in lab environment, need funding for relevant environmental testing for further progress. Should we accept an offer from a VC for 20% of equity, but enough money for 2 years of business? Without knowing any more, it sounds pretty reasonable, actually, depending upon how much money they're going to give you. So look, if you can get 2 years of funding, that's fantastic. You want to get at least 18 months of funding, because typically fundraising takes 6 months to a year. I would say on average, sometimes you get really lucky. Like I am working with somebody who did it in 1 meeting. Really rare, rarely happens, I would tell you. Every once in a while it does, but usually that's not the case. So look, if somebody is giving you 2 years worth of funding, assuming that it's a reasonable amount of funding, what do I mean by reasonable? It's not like $50 or something like that, but if it's several $100,000 to $1 million, 20-odd%, depending upon market climate, sounds like a reasonable deal. If we're raising like $100,000, it's on the high end of reasonableness. Typically I'd say first money in is about 10% if it's a small amount of money. And then as we start raising subsequent rounds, it's typically 20 to 30%. When we start getting to 500,000 to $1 million a round or more, you're going to give up that kind of numbers typically. Sometimes it changes, but on the face of it, what you're telling me sounds pretty good. Congratulations. Next question. We are currently talking with some investors for our pre-seed round. How long should be a proper length for the runway in this case? So this is the exact same question I just answered. 6 months or 1 year, etc. The longer, the better. Ideally, I would say 18 months minimum. Now, I know I'm going to go backwards on this because I know in many cases for these smaller initial rounds, the runways are shorter and you find yourself kind of in this perpetual fundraising mode. And I get it. And I know that that happens and it kind of sucks and that's just life. But the longer the runway, the better, because you'll be in this mode where you're always raising money. And if you can kind of keep that to a minimum, you're going to be better off because then you can focus on executing and running the business, which is going to be a better way to go. So I would say ideally you want at least 18 months, 24 months is even better. But look, if all you can get is 6 months, then you take the 6 months and maybe dial down some things. So maybe 6 months turns into 9 months and you make the best of the situation because we all need money. I hope that helps. Okay, next question. I am confident that the company I want to start will be successful, but we never know what the future holds. That's true. If this company fails, do you think I should start another company? I have another idea. Yeah, why not? As long as you're not scarred by this experience, many first-time founders fail. And then their second endeavor works out really, really well. So sure, go for it. Absolutely, go for it. All right, let's see what the next question is. If you have questions for me, by the way, you can put them in the chat box on both Zoom or YouTube, depending upon where you're watching. If you're watching me on Zoom, you can also use the Q&A box as well to ask questions. Fine with me. And if you're interested and you're watching on Zoom and you're not already part of my free community for startup CEOs, please join. It's called Zero to Pitch, and there should be a link for it on my YouTube page to join that community. All right. Okay, next question. I'm sorry, somebody just keeps flooding this the chat area with, quite frankly, garbage, which is just annoying the hell out of me. So I've got to kind of sift through that. I really apologize. Please stop doing that, person, because if I can find a way to ban you, I will. Being honest. Next question. We are a deep tech first year startup. We need some first adopters to convince investors and future customers. Is it more important to work with enterprise customers or do startups simply suffice? Okay, so it's hard to really know what advice to give you without being present in what you're doing. The best high-level advice that I can give you, though, is to tell you that you want to focus on what makes sense at this stage of business, typically at the beginning. Finding those first few customers are really difficult. So my philosophy is if we're at 0 customers, I always kind of think I'm an engineer at heart. So I'm always kind of thinking from an engineering perspective what to do. So I think in kind of logarithmic decades. If I've got 0 customers, I want to get to 1. If I've got 1, I want to get to 10. If I've got 10, I want to get to 100. And the strategies to get from 1 to 10 to 100 to 1,000 to 10,000 change along the way. So at the beginning, you may be very dependent upon relationships to get those first customers. And that's fine. It's just let's go find our business, find our customers, but there should at the same time be a focus and intent on what we're doing. So if we're trying to go after consumers, or you're saying enterprise customers at the beginning, great, go after them. What I will tell you is enterprise customers, what I think you're describing, are very large customers. At least that's the way I think about enterprise customers. And that can be very difficult, to do. for a startup can be very hard, to do, because it's difficult at the beginning, to get big customers. They take time, they take effort, they take energy. So you have to, and sometimes we find out that enterprise customers don't want to work with small companies as well. So all this stuff has got to go into your thought process in terms of what to do and where to find your customers, at the beginning. So sometimes the low-hanging fruit is a better way to go. I'll give you a couple book recommendations of things to think about. The first one is a book called Traction by Gabriel Weinberg, which is all about finding our first customer. So a great book to read on the subject. It goes through a very methodical process to find these customers. And then the second book, which is a little bit more deeper read, very thoughtful book, a fantastic book, kind of a startup Bible, is The Innovator's Dilemma by the late Clayton Christensen. Highly recommend both books to read. Maybe that will adjust your thought process on what to do as well. Okay, let's go on to our next question. Okay, from the same person. Okay, cool. Our technology is quote unquote too big, a breakthrough, that most customers want to wait and see the patent published before partnering. We can't wait that long. How do we build credibility in general? That's interesting. So you're kind of answering the previous question regarding, what customers do we focus on? We focus on customers where they don't care about patents. And that's kind of an odd thing to me, to be honest with you. I haven't heard that before. I live in a world where patents are critical, patents are important, but customers usually don't care. I'm sure there's more nuance to what you're describing than that. But if your customers are waiting on you and want to wait until something's published, you got to find other customers, because how are you going to get credibility? How are you going to have proof? And if we're trying to do something that sounds very deep tech as you're describing it, and we're going to need money for this, investors are going to want proof, right? Beyond the fact that you can execute. The execution piece will be great, but as we raise more and more money, we're going to have to show people that we have true demand for what we're doing. So I hope that helps. All right, let's go to our next question. I have a services-based pet care business. Hit 6 figures last year. Congratulations. We do want to roll out an app that can be white labeled. What's the best way to entice investors with a services-based business model? Well, it's all about potential in any business model, regardless of whether it's services or product or whatever. The market has to be big enough that as an investor, they're going to make the requisite amount of money that they need to make. Many businesses are not fundable by investors. In fact, I think the numbers are like 99% of all startups do not get a nickel of investor funding. They're all internally funded, or maybe they get money from a bank or something like that. So just remember that. It has to be enticing from the other side of the coin. So in other words, I don't know how much money you're trying to raise, but you have to look at it this way. If you're trying to raise $100,000, for example, typically if it's a very early stage company, the investor is going to want to make 10x to 30x on that money. So the $100,000 has to turn into 3 million. But for some investors, 3 million is just not big enough. So it has to be right sized to the type of investor that you want to meet with as well, and that is going to want to invest in something like that. So just remember that. And it may be that you have to internally fund, and that's okay. So Tyler says, this guy is the man. Okay, well, thank you if you're referring to me. Appreciate that. Next question. thank you for the great answer. What would you say are most important materials to have for a startup, such as a business plan, financial report, pitch deck, etc.? Is there some that I'm missing? Okay, there are two most important materials that a startup needs. You do not need a business plan, like a 30-page written business plan. Those are old days. We don't need to do that anymore. Pitch deck will suffice. And in the pitch deck will be your financial plan as well. In parallel with that, what's the real most important thing that we need as a startup? A great team. Inevitably, if we're trying to build something that's big, we need great people around us and a great team. So in parallel with your plan, plans aren't worth anything, and a pitch deck's not worth anything unless we've got the team to go execute it. So just remember that. You're going to need great people around you to be able to succeed. All of you that are listening today are going to need great people unless we're doing something solo, which is fine. If you're doing something solo, then hopefully you're great. But if we're trying to do something in a team-based approach, we're going to need great people to be able to succeed. That's the most important thing. You're going to spend the majority of your time as CEO recruiting. Just remember that. And that's what's important here. Is find really good people. Yes, you need a great pitch deck in a pitch. That's super important as well, but that's not going to be worth anything unless you have great people to help you execute. All right. Next question. Thoughts on starting a nonprofit tech company like Mozilla, Wikipedia? I'm starting a debating social media company. Well, good for you. Having never done a nonprofit before, I don't know how different it is from a for-profit company, except for this. Just find really good people, have a plan and go execute your plan. And if the idea is to share your vision with the world and to help people for free or just to break even, I know you got to pay yourself something at the end of the day. You want your business to be well run regardless. So make it well run, find really good people and execute. That's what I would do. Okay. All right. I think we may be out of questions right now. So I'm going to take a drink of water. I've been talking for like 45 minutes straight. So if you have questions for me, please leave them in the chat box on Zoom or YouTube, and I'll be happy to answer them for you. And of course, this always works. The minute I say it, I get a bunch of questions, which is really cool. So I will answer these questions. We've got about 15 minutes more left, so I can answer a few more questions at least. So let's see what we've got. Excuse me. What if you lack the skills to create, but you don't lack the knowledge in the niche? Is it worth pursuing? Currently outsourcing some coding and development. Okay. My general answer is yes. If you've got a vision, and let's say you're more on the marketing and business side, and you need people on the technical side, go find the technical people and go recruit those people. Yes, you can outsource this and outsource development. That's a way to go. The only problem with that, I would tell you, is that you're not building up internal IP if you're doing that. Everything's outsourced to somebody else. They have the IP, you don't. You want to build up internal IP as you go. But yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. There's story after story after story of people who aren't technical, who founded technology companies, if that's what you're asking. And they're very successful. So go for it. If you believe in something, you're going to need more people than yourself. And even if you're a technologist, by the way, and you're on the technology side of this question, you're going to need great marketing people. Eventually, you're going to need great salespeople. You're going to need a CFO. You're going to need all these various things as time goes on. It's very rare that one person can do everything. So we all need other skills. Nobody has everything. Okay, next question we have. I completely agree about the team. We currently are sufficient until we manage to commercialize the product. Then for a rapid employment will be needed, mostly asking what a VC want to have. Okay, it's so broad, I don't even know whether I can answer it. But if you're just developing something and you have a team, which is great, team is super important. For VCs, we're talking venture capital now, not angel investors, not friends and family, but venture capital. That means you're further along, you're into revenue at some point. Usually, there are exceptions to this, but for 99% of the people out there, most of you listening and watching, you're mostly likely in this bucket where you're going to need revenue and traction meaning revenue, and the more revenue and the more traction you have, the easier it's going to be able to get venture funding. And venture funding is not a given. For every 100 meetings, a typical VC will take face-to-face meetings, they'll invest in one company. Remember that. So it's not a given that you're going to be able to raise funding just because you want to raise funding. It's challenging. You have to be really good, and you're competing against really good people as well, both in and out of your industry. So the more revenue you have, the better. Would you ever invest in films? The answer is no. That's quick. Love your channel, by the way. Keep it up. Thank you. I appreciate that. What is the project you work now? I help startup CEOs around the world. That's my passion. That's what I do in various different ways. This being one of them. Probably 99% of what I do, I give away for free. Next question. People recommended hiring people from outside the Valley. I assume you mean Silicon Valley, because of the cheaper salary. Do you agree? No, I don't agree. Here's the challenge. I understand the financial piece of this, and it looks great on a spreadsheet to do it that way. But regardless of where you're living, let's say you're living in the Silicon Valley like I am, or you're living in Germany or India or Spain or wherever else anybody is listening today or watching today. Ideally, you want to build people, you want to build your team around the geography where you are. It's so much easier when you can work face to face to people than when you're navigating time zones. You're trying to do things over Zoom. You lose so much. Don't kid yourself. It's infinitely more difficult to do it that way. It doesn't mean it can't be done. There's story after story of people doing it that way. However, if given the choice, and I'm starting another company tomorrow, if I was starting another company, where would I look for people? Right here, because that's where I am. I'm going to make my life easier. And it's going to give me a better chance of success by doing it that way. Okay, next question. Brett, you are a gem. Thank you. Greetings from Finland. Question. Does it make sense that a CEO has only maybe 15 to 40% company ownership before VC investment, to be specific? Sure. Let's say there are just two of you and your co-founder, and you have 40%. Actually, it's going to even be different than this. But let's say that you have 40% and your co-founder start. You'll say you. I'm sorry, I'm messing myself up. So let's say that this is the scenario, because we've gone through maybe some angel funding, friends and family, you've given up, let's say, 30% of the company. So now you have 40%, your co-founder has 30%, and your existing investors have another 30%, just making up some numbers. Sure, makes complete sense. Let's say you have more founders than that, and you're down at that 15% number because you've divided up amongst five co-founders, right? And the five of you, let's say, have, let's say, 50%. I don't know what the numbers are, but I can see it mapping out in all sorts of different ways. So sure, that can be without question. You know, what I would tell you if you're worried about whether it's going to make sense for you to do this, um, which is, I think, really what's at the heart of this question, are you going to make enough money? What I would tell you is that any of those numbers, if your company succeeds, and we're talking about a big idea, you'll have more money than you know what to do with. Don't worry about it, is what I would tell you. If everything is fair, you know, between you and your co-founders, and you've given up some equity to investors along the way, it will work out. May not be perfect, but it'll work out. Okay. Randy asks, what is my motivation doing this on YouTube instead of continuing to advise startups directly? Okay, I will be completely direct and honest. Number one, as I continue to advise startups directly, that's part of my business model. This is essentially, you can look at this as marketing. I'm marketing my skills and ability to you. I'm giving away something for free to show you value, with the hope that you will eventually become, you know, one way is become a one-on-one client with me possibly, or you go join my free group Zero to Pitch and find so much value in that you join the paid group of Zero to Pitch Gold. One way or another, I help you. 99% of you will never work with me. I will never make a nickel or anything directly, and that's fine, because the value for me is being able to help people. And then from that comes all this other value that I end up making. So don't worry, financially, I'm doing just fine. Thank you. Okay, we have a question. This is a good question as well. Is it important to use lawyers during company registration in the early stage, even before co-founding team are constituted? Or is it advisable to incorporate the company before signing on co-founders or doing everything of note? I think that's the same question asked different ways, but I think once you start getting co-founders, you're going to want to have everything set up properly. You know, you want and it doesn't cost a huge amount of money either. That's the interesting thing about all this stuff. If you're serious about doing what you're doing and you want to build everything out, then yes, go get the company registered properly. You know, and if we're talking about the United States, it's typically going to be a C Corp, you know, probably registered in Delaware. Go do it. It doesn't cost a massive amount of money. Then you're also going to want to have all of your stock agreements done right. If we're going to have co-founders, we want the co-founder agreements to be done right. It just is going to save you over time, because when these things are done wrong, you pay for it later. I can't tell you how many CEOs I've worked with who have screwed this up at the beginning. And then they end up having to negotiate, and it's difficult and it's painful and it causes all sorts of angst. The good news is usually you can get out of these things when you screw it up, but it just costs you a lot of time and energy and money, you know, to extricate yourself from these things over time. So make your life easier, do it sooner is what I would tell you. Okay, I've got time for a couple more questions. I'm sorry, I'm laughing at the next question. So, what would make you invest in films comfortably? Nothing. No, look, in all seriousness, you want to look for investors that have experience in and around what you're doing. Savvy investors invest in what they know. I don't know the film business. Why would I invest in it? I'm going to lose my money if I do that. So I'm not likely to do that. I invest in things that I know. So I don't know film, so no, I wouldn't do that. Look for people who have experience in the film business to be your investors if that's what you're doing. That's the best way to go. If you have something really good, then they'll invest in it. Just have to find the right people. I always find this, all the time, interestingly enough, this kind of thing. And I see this all the time where people are like, make introductions to me. Aren't all investors the same? No, they're not. And experienced investors invest in what they know. They're not going to invest in stuff that doesn't make sense. Okay, I guess this might be our final question since we're almost out of time. Do you invest in companies? Yes, but only in areas, just like I said, that I know. Only where I have expertise, will I invest. That's it. Everywhere else, I advise and help and everything else. Okay, okay, I have a feeling I'm not going to be able to answer this last question here that we have, but I'll do my best. As a nonprofit social media company founder, how do you think I could find advertising or advertisers, excuse me? Okay, my generic answer, use, because I really don't know, to be honest with you, where you're going to find advertisers. This kind of sounds like advertisers equal customers in your particular case. So what would I do? Read Gabriel Weinberg's great book called Traction. You can read it in a day or a weekend, and it goes over strategies for finding customers. That's what I would do. Okay, we got a couple more questions here, so I've got a little bit more time, so I'll try and answer them. Finland is a small market. Is it smart for me to try to get investment from US and possibly move there? Oh man, that's so hard to answer. Um, and I'm cringing because usually the nice thing is in today's world is you can probably start in Finland without knowing what you're doing. And if you have something exciting, you can start getting investment, from other part. What I would do, I'm sorry, I'm kind of jumbling here a little bit, but what I would do is number one is I would try and find investors. If you can't find them in Finland, go find them in and around Europe first before. And I know European investors are different than US investors, but there are investors. It's just so hard because if you're going to come here and you have no infrastructure here, you have no team, no infrastructure, no nothing, and you're starting from scratch. There are people who've done it, but it's just hard, to make that work. So my preference would be if you have a team there and you guys know what you want to do, is even if the Finnish market is small, is get proof there and then start expanding on if beyond Finland to Europe, and then from Europe to the US. And then if you have to build out more teams, go do that. But try and make your life simpler. I don't think the US is a magic bullet for anybody. And the nice thing is in today's world, and maybe this is a benefit of COVID, is investors are more apt to invest in things remote than they used to be. Still, the preference is going to be, look, if you're in Finland, find Finnish investors. Ideally, if you can't find them in Finland, then find them in Europe. That's what I would suggest, but it's still easier to do it. All right. So with that, I don't think I've got any more questions. So, and we're actually beyond our time anyway. So thank you so much. Next week, by the way, is another incentive to join Zero to Pitch. I'm going to be doing pitch deck reviews only for the Zero to Pitch audience, only on Zoom. So there will be no Ask Me Anything next week. However, if you're part of Zero to Pitch, I'll review about 5 or 6 pitch decks live on Zoom only for our Zero to Pitch audience. So that's another incentive to go join Zero to Pitch if you're interested. Thanks a lot. Oh, okay. I've got this one question. I'm going to answer it because it's from a high school student in the Czech Republic, and it's a long question. Okay. All right. So your parents. Okay. All right. Great. So I'm glad I stuck around for this one. So I'm going to answer this question with all honesty. Being a parent of my daughter is 20, so I can relate to this question. So this person is in the Czech Republic. He's 17, still going to high school, and I hate the current education system. Very outdated. Probably is. I'd love to pursue my startup idea full time and risk it all, but my parents are pressuring me into staying. If this idea were to fail, I just have basic education, which could limit my opportunities in the job market. On the other hand, it's cybersecurity startup, and I have a lot of expertise there. I've hacked corporations like Google, Meta, okay, and can provide solutions which could fix large portions of these issues. So, do you think it's worth risking it um, and leaving or going full time on this? Okay, well, as a parent, I can totally answer this question. It sounds like you're super smart, which is great. But I totally understand where your parents are coming from, and they're right. The odds of this succeeding are low. The odds of any startup are succeeding is low. So what I would do, quite frankly, if I was in your shoes, because it seems like you're really smart and really motivated, my advice to you, for what it's worth, is do both. Go to school. If you're done with high school, and maybe the next step is to go to is to go to college. I don't know whether that's the next step or not, but if it is for you where you are, go to college, and because you're smart, and because you're motivated, start your business. And then if it's this rip roaring success and you've got this choice between the two, and you can see the success, then you know what? Maybe then that's when you drop out. But I totally understand where your parents are coming from, because education is everything. You want to have that education to fall back on. I understand your passion and everything else. And as I said, it sounds like you're super smart. So take my advice. Hopefully it works for you. So I hope that helps. Anyways, thanks everybody. Always fun to do these. As I said, next week we will be on Zoom only for my Zero to Pitch audience, doing pitch deck reviews live. So I'll be back on this hopefully in 2 weeks. So take care, everybody. Loved it.